So good evening, everybody who are on the eastern side of the prime meridian, and good afternoon, I guess, to everybody's on the western side of the prime meridian. And I'm Derek Keats. I'm just going to unmute Jared quickly before I do anything else here. You're good to go? Okay, so yeah, I'm one of the co-founders of Learn the Birds together with Etienne Murray, who's also here this evening. And we started Learn the Birds literally just 3 months ago. And with the idea that we would bring together people with knowledge of birds and birding. And it could be anything to do with birding. It could be biology. It could be exploring different parts of the world, which is what we're doing tonight. It could be about photography. And last night we had a really nice webinar on photography of birds in the Kalahari. And bringing together people with that kind of knowledge together with people who want to learn more about their birding, jack their birding up to the next level, just learn more about birds. And so that's what Learn the Birds is all about. And that's why we started it. We have currently, so we started on the 6th of August with our first webinar, and we've run about 40 of them, webinars and master classes since then, which is quite amazing in 3 months, I think. And it is been a very interesting experience for us. So now that we've got Learn the Birds up and running, we've done master classes and webinars, we're going to be moving on in the new year to also be offering some online courses as well about birds and birding. And you'll hear more about that probably only in January. And that's about it from Learn the Birds. This webinar this evening with Jared Clarke is in collaboration with Nature Newfoundland Labrador. And I used to be involved with Nature Newfoundland Labrador back in the days, probably before some people here were born, when it was called Newfoundland Labrador Natural History Society. And so it's fun to get back with those roots and to have an event that we are sharing between both sides of the prime meridian. So we're here in South Africa and Jared's over there in Newfoundland. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Jared, and you can introduce yourself and all of that stuff. I think I don't need to do that.
Not at all. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. Thanks for joining us today or this evening, depending on where in the world you're joining us from. It's nice. I can see some familiar names on the list of participants here for sure. So it's always nice to have some familiar folks in on the conversation. So before I start the presentation, I am just going to say a little bit about Nature Newfoundland and Labrador. I'm currently a board member with Nature Newfoundland and Labrador, and we're really pleased to be doing this partnership with Learn the Birds and Derek, who, as he said, was a board member long before I was. And Nature Newfoundland and Labrador is a not-for-profit organization here in Newfoundland that aims to promote the enjoyment of and the conservation of nature across the island. It's a completely volunteer-run organization, but we have lots of great volunteers, and we throughout the year offer lots of learning opportunities for folks to get involved in, lots of field trips in normal years. And this year, of course, during the COVID pandemic, a lot of our activities have moved online, much like this presentation has, which has actually been really positive in some ways. We've been able to reach out to a whole new audience, and as this seems to be happening this evening, we're able to be reaching out to people much further abroad than Newfoundland and Labrador. So that's always fun. So I'm just going to make a little pitch. We do have another online talk coming up next week with Nature Newfoundland and Labrador. It's going to be about moose and their effect on carbon sequestration in the Atlantic provinces of Canada. Dr. Sean Leroux, a local expert here, is going to be giving an online talk. That's going to be at 7:30 next Thursday evening. November the 19th, 7:30 Newfoundland time. That'd be 6 Eastern time. And right in the middle of the night, early morning for you folks over in South Africa. So unfortunately, probably not well timed for you. If you just bear with me for a second, I am going to switch over to my screen here. All right, and hopefully everybody can see my slides now. Yeah, so welcome to this afternoon's or this evening's talk, Birds of Newfoundland and Labrador, perched on the edge of North America. I did give this exact same talk last week, just at a slightly different time that was a little more geared towards people a little bit closer to where I'm actually seated right now. And this afternoon is a repeat performance, mostly for the folks in South Africa and on that side of the Prime Meridian. So a little bit about me. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Jared Clarke. I am a born and raised Newfoundlander. I grew up in central Newfoundland. I currently live in St. John's, the capital of the province. Always been an outdoors person, even as a kid, but I didn't really get into birds until I was working with a local conservation group just after high school. And it was during some of our training that I met a park interpreter, a national parks interpreter here who was into birding, and he took us on a bird walk. And I was just absolutely enthralled right from the get-go. And I immediately sort of jumped headlong into birding. And I've been, ever since that, one of the most active birders here in Newfoundland and Labrador. And a number of years later, I started leading in my part-time as a graduate student, leading some tours for a local company, some birding tours. And I realized that even more than I loved birding was sharing my passion for birds and my passion for the province I live in with people from all over the world. So it just became sort of very organic that I got into leading tours. And now I've sort of moved away from my academic life, and I run a small nature and bird tourism business here in Newfoundland and Labrador called Bird the Rock. You can see the logo there. You can catch me online at the website you see there, birdtherock.com. Yeah, so I'm very lucky. I always tell my family I have the best job in the world. I get to spend my time doing what I love and sharing it with other people who either love or will soon learn to love birds the way that I do. So it's been an absolutely fantastic ride so far. One of the little perks of being a birding and nature guide is that I also get to travel occasionally as part of my job. So it's absolutely wonderful that I get to a few times a year in a normal year, not so much this year, unfortunately. I get to travel to other parts of the world and explore there and share those explorations with other people as well. So just some photos from some of my various travels. But you didn't come here to hear about me, and you didn't even come here to hear about these other incredible, interesting places around the world. You came to hear about Newfoundland and Labrador. So for those of you who aren't familiar, we are the easternmost province in Canada. You can see it's highlighted there. Newfoundland, of course, being an island, and Labrador being the mainland part of the province. We are sort of jutting out there into the Atlantic on the very eastern edge of North America, hence the name of the talk. And we're also Newfoundland itself is one of the largest islands in the world. I think it ranks as the 15th or 16th largest island in the world, coming in at just over 109,000 square kilometers. So Newfoundland is much bigger, I think, than most people realize. And it happens that when a lot of tourists come here, they realize that the island is much bigger than they would have expected. And just to give you a little idea, you can see St. John's highlighted there in the very bottom right of your screen. It's on the eastern edge of the Avalon Peninsula in eastern Newfoundland. That's the capital of the province. And to drive across the island to the northern tip, where you see L'Anse aux Meadows listed, is about 1,100 kilometers or 700 miles. So it's a full day of driving nonstop on the highway just to get from one corner of the island to the other. So it's quite a large place, but that's great in lots of ways because it means we have some very diverse habitats, very diverse landscapes, and lots of wonderful areas to go exploring. And if you're a visitor to Newfoundland and Labrador, you can explore most of the island and a little bit of Labrador really well in about 2 weeks. So just to give you an idea. Labrador, of course, is much larger even than the island, but in lots of ways, much of it is very wild and rather less accessible than the island. So for the most part for this talk, we're going to be talking mostly about Newfoundland, the island, but I will sort of tackle a little bit about Labrador a little later in the talk, and I'm always happy to chat later privately with people if you want to know more about exploring Labrador in particular. So just a couple of quick points for those of you to get yourself oriented. Getting in and out of Newfoundland and Labrador is because we're an island, it's not always quite as straightforward as traveling to other places. We do have 4 major airports that have international flights coming and going from them on a daily basis. Of course, we have one here in St. John's International Airport, but also Gander in central Newfoundland, Deer Lake on the west coast, and at Happy Valley Goose Bay in Labrador. So there are flights coming and going from destinations like Halifax, Toronto, and in St. John's cases, international destinations pretty regularly. So it's fairly easy to get in here by plane. People traveling from other parts of Canada and sometimes the United States do like to travel sometimes by car, driving to get here. To do so, you'll have to take a ferry, of course, to get to the island. There is a year-round ferry that comes in at the southwest corner from Cape Breton, Nova Scotia, landing at Port aux Basques in southwestern Newfoundland. There's another ferry that also leaves from Cape Breton, Nova Scotia, and lands in Argentia on the Avalon Peninsula there, except that's only during the summer months, so during peak tourism season. That ferry normally runs. And there is also a ferry that connects the island of Newfoundland with Labrador, and that runs between St. Barbe on the island side to Blanc-Sablon, which is right on the border of Labrador and Quebec. And because of our geographic location in Canada's northeast, we're in the very far east. We're relatively far north when it comes to North America, and we jut right out into the Atlantic Ocean, as we were saying. So that really unique location also lends its hand to us having a really unique mix of birds as well. And that's a never-ending variety because as the seasons change, and it's really neat to be living in a place where every month of birding is very different than the others. And it's been growing in popularity with visiting birders. So it's not just the local birders that have learned the joys of birding in Newfoundland and Labrador. We've been getting lots more visiting birders every year. And it's especially been becoming popular with visiting birders from other parts of Canada and the United States. Of course, those ABA listers, those people who keep a North American list of things that they want to see, and also for ease of travel. We have a real array of habitats here on the island and some really diverse bird life. And especially for visitors from other parts of North America, we have some species that are otherwise kind of tough to see in other parts of Canada or especially the United States, but are relatively common or easy to see here. So that adds to the allure of visiting what's already been established as a very exciting tourism destination. Newfoundland and Labrador is already well known in the tourism landscape, and it is certainly a growing destination for eco-tourists and especially for birders. So for the remainder of this talk, we're mostly going to be talking about spring and summer, which is from a visitor's point of view, when most visiting birders would probably tend to come to the island. It's also when we have our greatest diversity of birds here in Newfoundland and Labrador. And we're going to just touch on winter briefly, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that at the end of the talk. So when most birders think about Newfoundland and Labrador, I would think that seabirds are the birds that come to mind. They really are sort of the iconic birds of Newfoundland and Labrador. We're very fortunate here in that we are home to some of the world's most spectacular, certainly some of the most spectacular seabird colonies in the world. But equally important is that we have some of the most accessible seabird colonies in the world. So not only are they absolutely huge and absolutely amazing and mind-blowing to see, it's not all that hard once you get here to see those colonies. Some of them are you can hike to relatively easily across land. Others are a very short boat trip with commercial tours available to see them. So some days it's more more than expected that you would see at least a dozen of some of the most sought after seabird species in the North Atlantic. And usually you can see those within the matter of just a couple of hours. So it's really is a great place to get your seabird fix, is to come to Newfoundland and Labrador. The Atlantic puffin, probably our most well-known seabird in lots of ways. It is our provincial bird. So you'll see it on lots of the marketing for Newfoundland and Labrador, lots of our logos and images. You'll see the puffin for lots of reasons. It's very abundant here, but it's also very colorful and fun to watch. Just a very popular bird for anybody, whether you are a birder or just someone who enjoys nature in general. Puffins are always exciting to see. We're very lucky here in St. John's on the eastern edge of the island in that North America's largest Atlantic puffin colony is located just 30 minutes away. It's a short drive and then a short boat ride right from downtown St. John's. So very lucky. It's located in the Witless Bay Ecological Reserve. You can see here on this map that the reserve actually is comprised of 4 islands with lots and lots of seabirds breeding on them from the months of May to pretty much the end of August. Those islands are protected, so it's not possible unless you're a researcher with a special permit to actually get out on the islands, but it is very easy to actually get out to see those birds because there are a number of commercial boat tours that operate out of Bay Bulls, Witless Bay, and Mobile, the communities that are just a few miles from these incredible islands. So here's just a few photos that I've taken over the last couple of summers while out on some of these boat tours. I'm very lucky in that as a birding guide here, I get to jump on these boats once, if not twice, every week during the summer. And it's definitely a highlight of my years to be able to become familiar with these incredible birds. As you can see from the photo there in the bottom, the boats are able to get very close to the island, especially in good weather. So seeing the birds is not a challenge at all. We do get very close, and all of these photos were just taken with my 300mm lens from the boat of birds on the island. So you can tell that we do get quite close, and it is very easy to enjoy the birds. The reserve itself is home to about 250,000 breeding pairs of Atlantic puffin. As I said, it's the largest colony in North America and the 3rd largest in the world. So that's 500,000 puffins that you can see, and you see the bulk of those in a day trip out to the islands for sure. It's just an absolutely incredible thing to see. But if you're someone who gets seasick easy, you don't like boats, or you're focused on photography and you'd rather not be taking photos of puffins from a moving boat, there are other options. The most popular option is at a little place called Elliston. You can see it marked on the map there. It's on the Bonavista Peninsula, another very touristy area as well. Lots to do up in that area. But one of the benefits of the puffin colony at Elliston is that it's on a small island that's very close to the mainland, and you can actually sit on solid ground, enjoy the puffins with your binoculars, and often the puffins will come in quite close for photos. So it's very popular with photographers as well. So there are more opportunities than just having to jump on a boat tour to see the puffins. And I suggest if you come here that you make time for both, because they're both wonderful experiences and great ways to enjoy the birds. But getting back to the Witless Bay Ecological Reserve, other than the puffins, I can give you about 4 million other reasons to go visit the reserve. The puffins are actually a minority there, even though there's 500,000 of them. The Witless Bay Ecological Reserve, those 4 islands that you saw the map of earlier, are home to about 4.5 million breeding seabirds during the summer months. And there's a reason I use the word spectacular to describe it. It is absolutely awe-inspiring to jump on a boat and head out there, and within a few minutes of leaving the dock, you start to see a few puffins in the water, and then a few start flying by. Soon you're seeing dozens of puffins, and within a few minutes, you're completely surrounded by puffins in the water, flying past the boat, standing on the cliffs. And as you head a little further down the island, you realize it's not just the puffins. There are hundreds of thousands of common murre and small numbers of thick-billed murre breeding on the cliffs there. Razorbill, also pictured here in the bottom left corner of your screen. And at times when they come off the cliffs, they can darken the skies. It's incredible to listen to. It is incredible to see. It is incredible to experience. Just an absolutely amazing place. And if you ever get a chance to come and visit us here in Newfoundland Labrador, Witless Bay Ecological Reserve should be at the top of your to-do list for sure. So those are the alcids. We do have, besides the Atlantic puffin, common murre, thick-billed murre, razorbill, and black guillemot, all breeding in the reserve. But we also have tens and tens of thousands of black-legged kittiwakes, our smallest of the non-hooded gulls, which breed there on the islands. Other gull species like herring gull and great blackback gull that you can see there silhouetted, also breeding on the island. Northern fulmar, you can see here. Witless Bay Ecological Reserve is one of the only reliable breeding places in the province, certainly on the island, for northern fulmar. There aren't many of them, but if you're with a good guide who knows how to point them out, you're almost guaranteed to see some northern fulmar on the cliffs as well. And this little guy in the right corner being held in my hand is a Leach's storm petrel. They're one of the most numerous breeders in the Witless Bay Ecological Reserve, but funnily enough, we almost never see them on the tours. And as many of you probably know, it's because of their nocturnal habits. They only come and go to their burrows. They burrow into the ground on the island, and they only come and go under the cover of darkness. So they're out way far out at sea, well beyond where our boats go during the daylight hours. Slightly after the sun sets, they'll return to their burrow to tend to the nest or feed chicks, whatever part of the season you're in, and they'll leave again before the sun comes up the next morning. So they only come and go from the island under cover of darkness. So even though there are a million or more breeding on the islands, in the maybe 60 times that I've been out on the boat tours to the Witless Bay Ecological Reserve, I can count on one hand the number of times I've seen Leach's storm petrel on those tours. So they're incredible little birds. We know they're there. We just don't get to enjoy them very often. But there are times we do get to enjoy them from other locations, especially during windstorms when they get blown into bays and that. So we do get to see them fairly regular. Just don't expect to see them on the boat tour to Witless Bay Ecological Reserve, unfortunately. And I can probably throw reasons to Witless Bay Ecological Reserve out there. Early in the season, it's a great place to hopefully be able to get up close and personal with an iceberg. As many people probably know, Newfoundland Labrador is one of the better places in the world to experience icebergs during the spring. Huge chunks of ice that about a year and a half earlier had broken off the ice sheets mostly in Western Greenland, float by our coast, and they can be absolutely awe-inspiring. And many years you can see them in or around the Witless Bay Ecological Reserve, and you can get quite up close and personal in the boat tours sometimes. So it's a great way to sort of see one of these other spectacles of nature. And it's also one of the best places for whale watching in the province. Humpback whales, minke whales, fin whales, occasionally orcas, and other marine life like these white-sided dolphins that you can see here in the bottom right are often spotted during the boat tours. And in fact, many people think of these boat tours as whale watching tours as opposed to birding tours, because most tourists who come here think about the whales more than the puffins. But certainly the guides on the boats are well versed in both, and they always take time to go see the birds. So it can be a great time to tick both of those things off your list, getting to see some wonderful whales up close and personal, and then seeing one of the most incredible seabird spectacles in the world. So there's one species that you probably will see on a boat tour of the Witless Bay Ecological Reserve, but you'll only see them flying past or possibly feeding, and that's the northern gannet. You will not see them breeding on the cliffs. They are a wonderful seabird to see, but they do not breed in the Witless Bay Ecological Reserve. But never fear, you don't have to go far to find them breeding. About 2 hours away from St. John's, on the sort of the southwestern part of the Avalon Peninsula, which is this little sort of H-shaped peninsula you can see here on the eastern edge of Newfoundland, is another ecological reserve called Cape St. Mary's. And Cape St. Mary's is home to an equally spectacular seabird colony. And the main stars of this colony are the northern gannets. Absolutely majestic birds. If you've never seen a northern gannet, they're huge with 6-foot wingspans, gorgeous to see with those sort of powdery yellow heads and those powdery blue beaks. Absolutely spectacular to see flying, absolutely amazing to see on their breeding colony. And Cape St. Mary's is one of the most accessible colonies of northern gannets in the world. So just, you can see here some photos of the colony that I've taken on previous visits. You arrive at a visitor center and lighthouse, and it's about a 1.5 kilometer, just about a mile walk over some absolutely gorgeous landscape. A fairly easy hike, nothing too difficult, out to the colony. So no boats required for seeing Cape St. Mary's Ecological Reserve. It is a walk to seabird colony. And once you get there, you're within 30 meters of some of the closest breeding gannets. And you can see some pictures here of one of my clients here photographing the gannets on their main colony. You can see this is it's actually a huge sea stack. It's not separated it is separated from the mainland. So there's a little bit of a chasm between this gentleman and the birds here. But you're within 30 meters, so it's incredible for photographers. They absolutely love it here. This is my daughter. I took her for the very first time last summer to see the gannets at Cape St. Mary's, and she was absolutely enthralled with it. Gannets are incredible, not just because they're so beautiful, but they're also a lot of fun to watch. They have some very unique behaviors, especially ritualistic behaviors. And one of the most popular to see, and especially to photograph for photographers, is what we call fencing. It's a bonding ritual that you can see over here on the right, where when one gannet returns, one of the pair returns from a fishing trip out at sea, they always sort of rub bills, clash bills. It looks like we always call it crossing swords, and it's a bonding ritual. Like most seabirds, northern gannets mate for life, and it's a ritual that extends that lifelong bond. So they're a lot of fun to watch, and incredible to just sit there and watch this huge colony of about 30,000 gannets perched atop the steep cliffs and the giant sea stack there. It's definitely one of the most fun things you can do as a birder. Just a couple of more photos to give you an idea. In this panoramic photo, you can see the lighthouse and the visitor center far off to the right, and a couple of guests in the left corner overlooking again, the colony at the top of the sea stack there. And just some more photos of some of my friends and guests enjoying the colony there. But just like the Witless Bay Ecological Reserve, the puffin may be the star there, and the gannet is certainly the star at Cape St. Mary's Ecological Reserve, but it's not the only species breeding there, which is wonderful. It gives you an opportunity to see lots of other breeding species. Again, common murre, lots of common murre breeding on the cliffs there, wonderful views of them. Black-legged kittiwakes. It's actually the southernmost range, the southernmost breeding location for thick-billed murre that you can see right here in the world. And it has a fair population. There are several hundred pairs of thick-billed murre nesting amongst the common murres at Cape St. Mary's. So it's a fabulous chance to sort of compare those two species and get to know them a little bit better. It's also quite a number of pairs of razorbill what I consider to be the classiest looking of all the alcid species, breeding at Cape St. Mary's. It's also a good spot to see great cormorant. So as many of you would know, we have two species of cormorant breeding in Newfoundland and Labrador, double crested and great cormorant. Very easy to find double crested. It's a little bit harder to find great cormorant nesting during the breeding season for the most part. So Cape St. Mary's is one of the more reliable places to actually be able to see this species during the summer, at least in the eastern half of Newfoundland and Labrador. So lots of really cool things to see besides the northern gannets, and it's easy to fill a couple of days at Cape St. Mary's if you'd like. It's an incredible place to go. And of course, as in all things, it's not just the birds. There are lots of other amazing things to see. The reserve itself, besides the seabird colony, it actually protects a really unique habitat it's a unique habitat to Newfoundland and Labrador, actually, and it's a fairly scarce one at that. It's called the Eastern Hyperoceanic Barrens, and we basically have subarctic tundra, these barren lands that meet the sea at the top of these very steep cliffs. And because it's so close to the sea and there's lots of fog and cool winds coming off the sea, the climate there is actually mediated at the very edge. It's a different climate zone than it is even 100 meters inland. So the very edge of the land there is very subarctic or subalpine in lots of ways. And you will find locally rare plant species growing there, and quite a few species like this diapensia, these white flowers that you can see here, or Mas campion that you can see here, that you would typically only find at much higher elevations in subalpine cold climates. But they're at home here and native to the Eastern Hyperoceanic Barrens because of that really unique interaction between the land and the sea. So it's a really cool habitat to visit, and lots of things to see. Lots of other wildlife, including some of the world's southernmost woodland caribou are roaming the Barrens here as well. Red fox is very common, and they are often seen prowling around hunting for seabirds on the cliff's edge. And this is short-tailed swallowtail. It's a very range-restricted butterfly species, my absolute favorite butterfly species, very beautiful. And Newfoundland and Labrador is one of the only places in the world, and certainly the easiest, to find it. So there's lots of really neat things to see if you spend a day or two exploring the wonder that is Cape St. Mary's Ecological Reserve. And again, it can be a day trip from St. John's easily enough. It's just a 2-hour drive, but it's also a wonderful place to spend a couple of days. But continuing on the theme of seabirds, it's important to point out that there are other seabirds that you can certainly see, especially in late summer, that don't even breed here. So not all of our seabirds are breeding seabirds. And during the late summer, a number of additional species can be spotted. Probably some of the most common of those are the shearwaters. We call them hagdowns or box in Newfoundland and Labrador. We have lots of colorful local names for many bird species here. Great shearwater, as you can see here in these two far left pictures, and sooty shearwater are the two most common. They actually breed in the southern hemisphere during our winter months, and they head north for their winter, showing up in our waters in usually late June, July, and August are the best times to see these for sure. And they come here for the same reason that all of our breeding seabirds do, for the same reason that our whales do, and it's to feed on the abundant fish in the North Atlantic, primarily capelin, which is a small schooling fish, very abundant in our waters during the summer, but other species as well. So they come all the way to sort of spend those months feeding on those fish. Here on the far right, you can see a Manx shearwater. It's much scarcer. We don't see them as in certainly not in the large numbers that we see. There's times you can see thousands of shearwaters, but you're likely to only pick out maybe a dozen or so if you're lucky of the Manx shearwater. The difference being that they do breed in small numbers in at least one colony in southern Newfoundland, and as far as I know, it's the only confirmed Manx shearwater colony in North America. I could be corrected on that. and it's on the south end of Newfoundland. So those three species of shearwater you can expect to see on a good day in late summer, while enjoying all the breeding birds as well. And here's just a fun photo that I was actually, believe it or not, I was trying to photograph the great cormorant that's in this photo during a boat trip in Bonavista Bay on the north side of Newfoundland this summer in early August, when it got completely photobombed by a humpback whale. There were whales all around us, easily 50 whales that we saw that afternoon all around, and just thousands and thousands of shearwaters. So this was one of my favorite photos from all summer, and it's hard to convince somebody that it was actually the whale that photobombed the great cormorant, but that was the case. And just a few other seabirds that we do see here in much smaller numbers during especially the late summer. Great skua there on the left, quite a pelagic species. It doesn't often come close to shore, but sometimes when you're out especially on boat trips, it is certainly one to keep an eye out on. Pomerine yager, long-tailed yager here, as well as parasitic yager, all show up in small numbers, especially in late summer. They're kleptoparasites, and they spend their time, instead of catching their own food, chasing mostly the kittiwakes around, trying to scare them into giving up their lunch. So they're a lot of fun to watch as they pirates of the sea, as they're going around harassing all the other birds. It is a lot of fun to watch. And red-necked phalaropes, not technically seabirds, but in late summer, as they're migrating south from their breeding grounds, they do spend most of their time on the ocean, and that's where we do see them, is on the ocean, flocks of them usually. So lots and lots of seabirds in Newfoundland, and it's certainly what Newfoundland is most famous for in the birding world. So it's easy to get lost among the seabirds, and it's easy to spend lots of your time out enjoying and looking for the seabirds while you're here. But it's important to remember that lots of other birds to see. We're a really big, diverse province with lots of different habitats to explore, and each one of those comes with its own suite of birds, wildlife, and other natural highlights. So if you can pry yourself away from the puffins and the gannets and all those other amazing seabirds and spend some time in some of the other habitats, it's an absolutely important thing to do, and you won't regret it. So just an example of some of the diverse bird life here with Boreal Chickadee, Boreal Owl, Mourning Warbler. This is a Wilson's snipe, Willow Ptarmigan. It's a great bird that is quite easy to see in Newfoundland compared to most other parts of North America, even where they occur. Pine grosbeak here, one of our really colorful finches that is resident and here year-round. Yellow-bellied flycatcher, most Nax flycatchers, and another warbler species, black-throated green. So lots of really cool birds to see. I just want to talk about some of those specific habitats, three of them actually that are the most fun, or certainly the most abundant to explore here on the island. The first being the boreal forests. All of Newfoundland and Labrador is within the boreal range, meaning that all of our forests are boreal. They're northern forests and characterized by certain types of trees. But that being said, the forests across Newfoundland and Labrador are very diverse. So you'll find a very different forest type, for example, here on the Avalon Peninsula around St. John's, where I am, where the forest is almost completely coniferous with very little hardwood mixed in. We call it the Avalon Boreal Forest. If you head further west on the island, you get out into central Newfoundland, you start seeing a lot more hardwood mixed in, birches and aspens and balsam poplar mixed into the mix. And as you get even further west onto the west coast, Grossmoor National Park, those areas, the forests are even more diverse, much more hardwood. And as the diversity of the forest changes, as you can imagine, so does the diversity of the songbirds. So while eastern Newfoundland may have all of the seabird colonies, and most of those are located off the Avalon Peninsula or northeastern Newfoundland. If you go to western Newfoundland, you'll find a higher diversity of songbirds. So a real great reason to sort of explore more of the island is that you will get a much greater diversity of birds, as you can imagine. So these are just some of the boreal breeding species that are fun to see and certainly popular with lots of visiting birders when they come here. Boreal chickadee over here, olive-sided flycatcher or boreal flycatcher that's been seeing huge population declines like most insectivores. Black-poll warbler, spruce grouse, Canada jay over here in the top right, magnolia warbler here in the bottom left, hermit thrush, black-throated green warbler, red crossbill. The neat thing about red crossbill is that we have our own subspecies of red crossbill in Newfoundland that's considered to be endemic, the Perched subspecies. It's the largest billed of all the red crossbills. So while red crossbill does occur across North America, there are a number of recognized subspecies, and the one in Newfoundland is considered to be endemic here. And in addition to that, it's seen some huge population declines in the last 40 years, and it's considered to be endangered. So always exciting to see for both of those reasons. And I'm happy to say that, at least anecdotally, it seems like numbers have been going up in recent years, and the conservation approach we've been taking seems to, at least in the short term, seems to be working. And again, pine grosbeak over here. So there are lots of really great places to explore the boreal forest throughout Newfoundland. As I mentioned, the whole of the island is in the boreal region. So anytime you see a forest and you get out and explore in Newfoundland, you're exploring boreal forest. But again, the forests are very diverse. So it's worth exploring areas throughout the island to get a sense of that diversity and the different mix of birds you'll find in those forests. So the Avalon Peninsula here in the east, very, as I mentioned, very coniferous, heavily coniferous forest, with very little hardwood mixed in. And heading west across the island, you get into Terra Nova National Park, a fantastic park to go explore with some real great examples of protected old growth balsam fir and black spruce forests. Central Newfoundland is really where you start to get into more of the hardwood forest, as you can see here in this photo with the white birch, yellow birch, paper birch, balsam poplar. Lots of really neat forests there to go exploring. And I grew up in central Newfoundland, so those forests feel like home to me. It's always fun to get out of my current home in St. John's and back to my old stomping grounds. And Grossmore National Park, really great place as well. A beautiful park for lots of reasons, but lots of amazing hiking trails and great way to explore the forests. And the Codroy Valley in the southwest corner of Newfoundland. The interesting thing about that, especially for local birders, most of us are concentrated in eastern Newfoundland on the Avalon Peninsula, is the Codroy Valley has a very diverse forest, and it has the greatest diversity of breeding songbirds on the entire island. So it's a fun trip just for us to head across the island and spend a few days in the Codroy Valley, where we get to see a lot of breeding, especially warblers, but vireos and several sparrow species, for example, that just don't occur in other parts of Newfoundland and Labrador. So it's a fun place for local birders and visiting birders alike. Now, getting away from the forests, about wetlands, and that's something that we have in spades. If you were to fly low in a helicopter or a plane over Newfoundland and Labrador, I think the thing that would be most remarkable to you is just how much water and how many wetlands we have on the island. It's seeing it from the air like that, it's hard to imagine that we found enough solid dry ground to actually build our communities on. There are lots of bogs, marshes, ponds, lakes, rivers, just dotting the entire landscape. And because of that, we have a pretty good diversity of wetland birds, as you can imagine. So lots of breeding waterfowl species, northern pintail here in the center, the pair, ringneck duck over here on the left. It's easy to find breeding ducks throughout Newfoundland and Labrador. What we don't have a lot of are herons, to be honest. This is an American bittern here, a very secretive species for those who aren't familiar with it. Very secretive, very hard to see. You hear them far more often than you see them. But it's our only widespread breeding heron in Newfoundland and Labrador. They breed right across the island in the correct habitat. The only other species of breeding heron we have are great blue herons, and it's just in the Codroy Valley area where we have a couple of rookeries. But incredible birds to go out and look for. Several species of shorebird breed in our wetlands, including common snipe, Wilson snipe over here in the bottom left, Sora, followed by common loon. And this is a species that that people are always excited to see, especially people from more southern areas in southern Canada or the United States, because they might get to see them in their winter plumage, but they don't get to see them often in this spectacular breeding plumage that they're so famous for, and to hear those incredible calls. We're very lucky in Newfoundland Labrador in that we have loons breeding all over the place, and very, very common and very easy to find. And of course, piping plover over here, another one of our breeding shorebirds. It's for those of you, especially in who are joining us from other parts of North America, you'll know that piping plover is an endangered species. It's been critically endangered at times. You can imagine that its breeding habitat on sandy beaches clashes with human behavior a lot. It's a place that humans like to hang out and to disturb. So piping plover has been in real danger across its breeding range in North America. But numbers seem to be coming up in most places, including here in Newfoundland and Labrador. And there are a number of locations now where you can reliably find successfully breeding piping plovers on our beaches again. And it's always a wonderful thing to see. So just an example of some of the wetlands. The top left corner there is the Codroy Valley, the Codroy Estuary. It's the only Ramsar listed wetlands in Newfoundland and Labrador. Lots of great conservation activity going on there. It's a very diverse wetlands with lots of really neat breeding species. And it's in an absolutely cool setting, of course, with the Long Range Mountains there in the background. And one of the neat things, of course, about our wetlands, and I'm sure in many places, is that communities have went out of their way in lots of cases to build trails, boardwalks, to make wetlands accessible to locals and to visitors alike. So there are lots of great opportunities to explore wetlands in lots of communities across Newfoundland and Labrador. And the third and last habitat I want to talk to you a little bit about are a very diverse habitat, in fact. It's the coastal barrens, the subarctic and subalpine tundra that we have across Newfoundland and Labrador. So they're actually made up of a number of different, very specific, unique habitats, including the eastern hyperoceanic barrens that we already chatted a little bit about, where you can see examples of really well at Cape St. Mary's, but also up around Bonavista and Cape Race in the very southeastern corner of Newfoundland. So those are coastal barrens, absolutely beautiful. And looking out across them, they're treeless, and you can see why we call them barrens if you were to be looking across them. But one thing they're not is barren of life. And there are lots of really cool bird species, like our willow ptarmigan, short-eared owl, horned larks, savanna sparrows, breeding across those habitats. You know, things like American pipit breed at the very edges, on the cliffs at the edge of these coastal barrens. Incredible place to explore. And it's especially for anybody who's into looking at wildflowers. Those coastal barrens are one of the most interesting places to stop and look down at your feet and see the incredible nature that is sort of just hovering there at your toes. It's a really interesting place to explore. But those aren't the only kinds of barrens and tundra that we have. We do have high elevation as well. So they're more subalpine tundra. We don't have tall mountains in Newfoundland and Labrador, but we do have a mountain range on the west coast, the Long Range Mountains, which are an extension of the Appalachians, actually. So the Appalachians, you know, from the United States fall under the ocean. They come back up here in southwestern Newfoundland. The Long Range Mountains go from the very southwestern end of Newfoundland all the way up here into the northern peninsula. They pass right through Grossmoor National Park. It's part of what makes the park such a scenic and spectacular place to visit. The tops of those mountains, although they're very old mountains, several times older than the Rockies, meaning that they've been worn down over many, many ice ages. So they're not especially high. The highest point in the whole island is about 810 meters high. So that's something like 2,800 feet. So not especially high, but once you get to the top of some of these mountains, they're very barren, lots of talus. You can see myself and Jody Allaire and Derek from Parks Canada here hiking at the top of one of these mountains, and you can see the talus here. So very unique habitats at the tops of these mountains. They're very tundra-like, and a great place to see species such as rock ptarmigan, which in most of North America is quite difficult to find. And lots of really cool and rare species in that growing up there as well. These habitats are also important for the woodland caribou. There are a number of herds throughout Newfoundland and especially Labrador. And these kinds of habitats are a great place to go look for and to see them. So some of the places we already mentioned: Cape Race, Cape St. Mary's, and Cape Bonavista, Grossmore National Park, but also at the very end of the very tip of the Great Northern Peninsula, up around Lonsa Meadows and St. Anthony, there are some really great examples, many of them protected, of the coastal barrens. And the difference between the coastal barrens here on the western part of the island compared to the eastern part are that they're primarily limestone. There's no limestone in eastern Newfoundland. In fact, it's a whole different story, but geologically, eastern Newfoundland originates from Africa. We would have been connected to what is now modern day Morocco many millions of years. Western Newfoundland is part of the Laurentian plate. So it has lots of limestone bedrock, which means that the plant life is very different, for example, in western versus eastern Newfoundland. It's part of the reason the forests are so much more diverse. So it also lends itself to a more diverse wildlife and especially bird life. So really interesting just to sort of be able to explore those different habitats with an eye to things other than birds. So, as I mentioned, lots of other treasures to discover besides the amazing birds that we have throughout the island. You can see here in the top picture, it's a picture of a moose that I took a couple of years ago in the early morning fog. I don't know what you'd be more excited to discover, whether it was the moose or the fog, but we have plenty of both, and happy to share. The fossil here is from the Mistaken Point Ecological Reserve at the very southeastern tip of Newfoundland, just a couple of hours from St. John's. It's a relatively new UNESCO World Heritage Site, and it's internationally significant because it is home to some of the earliest evidence of multicellular life in the world. They like to use the tagline "where life got big," and these are fossils from the time when life initially went from single cellular to multicellular complex organisms. And you can see thousands of fossils while walking on these incredible flat rocks that jut out into the Atlantic. It's an incredible place to go and see. The birding along the way is fantastic, and you're rewarded with this really neat fossil experience at the end. So definitely a place that I like to take clients, and I recommend, if you're going to have a chance to visit Newfoundland and Labrador, that you take the time to take this in as well. Lots of incredible scenery, including lighthouses, wildlife like these seals. This is a young harp seal here. And again, lots of really cool flowers. These are both orchids. Dragon's mouth orchid, which you can see all across Newfoundland and Labrador, growing in our very abundant bogs. And this is showy lady slipper, which you only see in certain parts of western Newfoundland because it does depend on that limestone-based habitat that we just don't have, for example, here in eastern Newfoundland. And this is a bake apple. We have tons and tons of different berries that grow across Newfoundland and Labrador. One of the things that we have that we consider to be we're very wealthy in diversity of berries that we can pick and enjoy. And bake apple, that we call it locally, you may know it as cloudberry. They're parts of the northern world and Scandinavia for sure. So yeah, lots of incredible things to do and explore while you're out exploring what are otherwise great birding habitats. Late summer brings another change to the island in the way of shorebird migration. There are only a handful of shorebird species that actually breed in Newfoundland and Labrador. Wilson snipe, greater yellowlegs, least sandpiper, for example. So we don't get to see a whole lot of shorebirds during the early part of the summer. But once mid to late July comes, we have more than 20 species of shorebird that migrate south through the province. So late summer is a great time to go out exploring the beaches and the upland barrens, looking for some of these species. And it's really nice because it's when the songbirds are sort of getting quiet and beginning to raise their families. They're a little harder to find. So having all these new birds arriving is a great way to sort of add some spice to a day of birding um, around Newfoundland and Labrador. So just some more of these shorebird species that you can expect to see migrating through. And, the nice thing is, of course, is that different species migrate at different times. So we start getting some of the early shorebirds, ruddy turnstones and whimbrel, for example, in sort of mid to late July. And then later species, so for example, the white rump sandpiper that you can see here in the top right, are still migrating through Newfoundland right now in November. So the shorebird migration season is quite protracted, and you see different species at different times, and it's a real fun way to sort of get out there, challenge yourself to identify them, and to really enjoy that part of our summer. And I'm just going to mention winter very briefly. I do think it's our best kept secret. Winter birding in Newfoundland and Labrador is absolutely fun and wonderful, and a whole different diversity of birds that you're not going to see during the summer, and many birds that you're not going to see in other parts of Canada very easily, or certainly into the United States. So we have a real neat mix of northern birds that spend the winter here. They consider Newfoundland to be south, and believe it or not. And so there's a real change that comes in winter. The birding is spectacular. Oftentimes you can get close to a lot of these species, so it's great for photography as well. And it's relatively easy birding in lots of cases. Some really great birding that you can do right around St. John's in the city. Some of the best winter birding. So I don't want to tell you too much about our winter, other than to sort of whet your appetite. In number one, thinking about maybe doing something a little bit different and coming to visit Newfoundland and Labrador during winter, which more and more birders are doing every year. But I also want to whet your appetite for another upcoming presentation. Another local birder here, Lancy Chang, and I will be joining you guys on December 10th to chat about the winter birds of Newfoundland and Labrador. And we'd love it if you can find the time to come out and join us as we chat about that entirely different but equally exciting season here in our beautiful province. And I want to end just for those of you who are thinking about maybe one of these days actually coming to visit Newfoundland and Labrador, especially from further away. Just a few little things to think about when it comes to planning a trip here. As I mentioned, it's a fantastic birding destination any time of the year, whether you want to come in the middle of summer, or you want to come in late summer, or you want to come in the middle of winter. There's always something fantastic to see, and the birding is just wonderful. And it's not just the birds. Newfoundland is already a well-known tourism destination because of its icebergs, its whales, our incredible history, lots of culture, and nowadays the food. It's a real culinary experience, especially here in St. John's. Some of the best restaurants, the best rated restaurants in Canada right now are in St. John's. It's a real great place to come and spend, whether it's a long weekend or a couple weeks exploring. I do want to mention, of course, travel in the days of COVID. Unfortunately, nobody's going to be coming to visit us in the next little while. You should be aware if you ever do plan a trip to Newfoundland and Labrador during the days of COVID, that we have our own travel restrictions, in addition to national ones that you need to consider if you're planning to come visit in the near future. I certainly hope that within the next year that we're able to open up and welcome more birders back into Newfoundland and Labrador again. But certainly COVID has changed travel, and the impacts of that are going to be felt for quite a while. So certainly feel free to touch base with me at any point if anybody is thinking about planning a visit to our little corner of the world, and I'll help you with some of those logistics. As soon as it's safe, we're here with our arms open, waiting to welcome you. One of the biggest questions I get is, how much time do I need to explore Newfoundland and Labrador? And I always like to tell people, if you want to sort of travel across and see most of the island and a little bit of southern Labrador, it is much bigger than you expect it's going to be. And I usually suggest that you take at least 2 weeks to do that. So if you have 2 weeks to come, that does give you ample time to sort of start in St. John's, for example, and explore across the island to the west coast, and maybe spend a day or two in southern Labrador as well. But don't worry if you have less time than that. It's simple. You just narrow your visit to one of the general areas. So, for example, doing western or eastern Newfoundland alone, and maybe saving the rest for a second trip. Who knows? And then, deciding which area you want to visit if you have less time depends in part on what you most want to see. So, for example, if you're really interested as a birder in seeing the seabird colonies, and that's highest on your priority list, you'll want to come to eastern Newfoundland, fly into St. John's and explore this part of the island, because that's where all the seabird colonies are. If the songbird diversity is more important to you, then maybe you want to go to the west coast, where there's more diverse breeding songbirds during the summer. So just some things to consider like that. People also often ask, when is the best time to come visit? And as I always say, any time of year is fantastic. But choosing your own dates sort of depends, again, on what it is that you're most hoping to see. So just some examples to help you sort of get a timeline. The seabird colonies are most active from late May to early August. So you basically have the whole summer is a fairly large window to come and see all the breeding seabirds. The breeding songbirds, of course, are most active starting in early June, and that sort of starts to quiet down in early July. When the birds stop singing and start tending to their families. If whales are big on your target list, you're going to want to come in July or maybe early August. That's when they're most numerous and reliable. They're a little less reliable, for example, in June. So while you might be able to come and see all the songbirds and the seabirds, you can't depend on the whales until at least into July. Icebergs are earlier. If you want to see icebergs, you may need to come a little bit earlier in the season, May and June. But maybe you want to see the shorebird migration. You come late summer if you're interested in wildflowers, and of course winter birding as well. So again, these are all just some ideas. If you're thinking about planning a trip to come visit us, I'm happy to chat sometime privately and help you choose the dates that would work best for you and for what you want to see. And the biggest tip I can give you is that if you ever do plan to come to Newfoundland and Labrador, is to plan ahead. Being an island, our accommodations here, and especially the rental vehicles, often book up months in advance. So you want to have those plans in place, in lots of cases, months, at least weeks before you come to visit, if you're coming during peak tourism season, because it's not always guaranteed that you're just going to be able to show up at an airport and get a rental car if you haven't booked one in advance. And there's always lots of other things to see and do besides birding and even besides nature. There's incredible scenery, there's incredible history here, lots of cultural activities to take in. And I'm always happy to spend another hour talking about all of those things, because it's very close to my heart. And I'm always like to help my clients plan very multidisciplinary, very, very general trips where they get to experience all of that, as well as the incredible birds and wildlife that we have to offer. And just a couple of things about visiting Labrador. I know I haven't mentioned Labrador very much during this talk, but it's much larger and in lots of ways less accessible than the island. So it's beautiful, it's exciting, and it's very much worth a visit, but it does require a little more planning. Southeastern Labrador down here is accessible by ferry from Newfoundland. So you can take a ferry over. You can spend a day or two exploring sort of this part, the southeastern part of Labrador, what we call the Straits. Lots to see and do there. It's certainly worth a trip, and it's easy enough to tack just a couple of days on to a visit to the island to go over and explore this part of Labrador. If you want to explore further into other parts of Labrador, it's a little more challenging to plan logistically, but certainly not impossible. There is a paved highway now that starts in Forteau and goes all the way to Cartwright and Happy Valley Goose Bay. About 600 kilometers of driving, and some of those are very isolated sections. So very doable, but something you do want to plan ahead for and make sure that you're prepared for that kind of travel. A place that's growing in popularity is the Torngat Mountains National Park up here in northern Labrador. It's one of Canada's newest national parks. It is absolutely spectacular from all the photos I've seen. I've never been there myself. I was supposed to be there this year, but of course, with all this COVID situation, that was one of the first things that got canceled. So I like to say it's just been delayed. I hope to get there sooner than later. But it is spectacular. but it is quite inaccessible. You can't drive to it. It's fly-in only. There are outfitters there. The Nunatsiavut group of companies, the natives there, have some outfitting companies and run some tours. So with a little planning, you can certainly get up there and explore this really wild part of Labrador. Yeah, and I'm happy to chat about that again. Anybody who wants more information on planning a more adventurous trip like that, yeah, I'd love to help you plan it, and I'd even love to join you sometime. All right, and these are just some pictures from Labrador. We have Red Bay here in the Straits area, southeastern Labrador. This is a UNESCO World Heritage Site as well, because of the Basque whaling village that used to be here. An absolutely spectacular area to explore. Some of the breeding birds you can expect to see, even in southeastern Labrador. And these are some pictures by my friend Derek with Parks Canada of Saglec Bay, for example, polar bears and breeding snow buntings, all from the Torngat Mountains National Park. Again, fantastic place to consider going to visit if you're a little bit more of an adventurous traveler. All right, here's a little bit about my information for anybody who would like to chat further about birds and birding in Newfoundland and Labrador, or would just like to follow along on some of my adventures. You can check out my website. You can also feel free to follow me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. I try to keep those things updated fairly regularly with photos from my own adventures. This year, of course, most of my own adventures are closer to home, but no less exciting for sure. And I can put that up again if anybody needs some help. But I just want to say thank you. And I hope everyone enjoyed this little introduction to spring and summer birding in Newfoundland and Labrador. And maybe it's motivated you to come back and learn a little bit about winter birding next month with us.
So thanks very much, Jared. That was awesome, as always from you. And I'll back you up on your thoughts about how beautiful Labrador is. Back in the day when I was much younger, there were no roads in Labrador. So you could hitchhike, but you had to hitchhike on a helicopter or the mail plane or something like that. So I've done the whole length of Labrador a couple of times, once by hitchhiking on a helicopter and once by hitchhiking on the mail plane. So it was quite interesting, and it is very beautiful. And I think, now that I know a little bit about birds, I think it would be really enjoyable from a birding perspective as well. So we've got a few questions and a few comments. So let me just go through them. Etienne says he loves to whale with the cormorant. Harriet, who's in Uganda, by the way, says, thank you so much for sharing your beautiful pictures. I love the puffins. I think everybody loves the puffins. Andrew says, thanks for the interesting presentation. We've enjoyed traveling virtually to a part of the world we didn't know much about. And I think that's one of the great things about Learn the Birds is that, we will bring you to different parts of the world. And whether you're from Newfoundland and want to see the Karoo, arid regions of South Africa, or you want to go to the lush jungles of Colombia, that's what we'll do. Let's see, when do you recommend people visit? I think you've done that already. That was an earlier question. What are the conditions like in the heart of winter? I would say stay tuned for the 10th of December.
Yeah, no, certainly we'll talk about winter a little more in our next talk, but it's in general, the Newfoundland climate it's a marine climate, so it's more temperate than the rest of Canada. So our summers don't get as hot or as humid as they do in central Canada, and our winters don't really get quite as cold. So it's we're sort of temperate. It's not to say it's not cold if you're not used to it, but it's certainly, you don't get those bitter cold temperatures that central Canada gets.
Another thank you, not a question, but this is from Amanda. Not a question, but I visited Newfoundland last year, watching this presentation to relive my vacation during COVID times. It was even better than can be shown in the photos. James says, good to see you, Jared. Newfoundland Labrador is on my list for early after COVID. And Sandra says, thanks, Jared, very informative and delightful. Nice to see the participants spend some time together this afternoon. I think there's one more. No, that's the last one. Yeah, are there any other questions? I think we're a small enough number now. I'll just open the microphone and allow people to unmute themselves if you want to ask a quick question or make a comment. Otherwise, I will thank everybody for coming and for those who stayed to the end. We've got a couple of interesting webinars coming up on Learn the Birds as well. We've got Etienne blocking up the whole of next week, it seems. He's got one on how to get more birds on Birding Big Day, which is a big event here at the end of November when everybody goes out and tries to get as many birds as they can in one day. And he's got a really interesting talk coming up also next week, Thursday. Is it Thursday or Wednesday? It's the 18th, exploring the love of bird sound. For those of you who don't know, Etienne is probably one of the best people I know for bird calls. Not only bird calls, but even contact call, not even the sort of song calls, but even contact calls. So I'm sure this is going to be really interesting. And with that, I think we'll round up the evening. Thanks again, Jared. I really, really appreciate your taking the time and sharing it with us, and especially given that you've had to do it twice. And yeah, hopefully we'll see you on the 10th of December in the snow.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, maybe not snow by then. I'm hoping I don't have to break my shovels out for a little while yet.
Well, we definitely won't because it's the middle of summer here, but yes. Okay, take care. Thanks, everybody. Good night. Good night. Good afternoon. Bye.